track a band of Uruk-hai westward across the plain. They've taken 2 of our friends captive.
Look for your friends, but do not trust to hope. It has forsaken these lands.
We're lost. I don't think Gandalf meant for us to come this way.
He didn't mean for a lot of things to happen, Sam.
I knew within 48 hours we were involved in making cinema history. I knew.
More and more people also talk to me about the ending of the first film. They're like, what's up with the ending, dude? Well, it's gonna continue.
The fate of the world will soon be decided.
It's a phenomenon. It's cinema history in the making.
The dominion of evil grows even stronger.
Part 1 was a damn wonderful film. You ain't seen nothing yet.
There is a union now between the 2 towers. Barad-dûr, fortress of the Dark Lord Sauron, and Orthanc, stronghold of the wizard Saruman.
The characters all sort of take their own journeys in the 2 towers.
It's a roller coaster journey from the first minute.
I just knew it was going to be an epic adventure. Not the movie, but, well, the movie, but also the making of the movie.
I really see the second film as the beginning of the journey. At the beginning of the film, Frodo and Sam are on these rocky hills trying to navigate their way around. What's that horrid stink? Or there's a nasty bug nearby. Can you smell it?
Yes. I can smell it. We're not alone.
The ring starts to take more of a hold of Frodo. He starts to become more openly obsessed with it, and they ended up running into Gollum, who becomes their guide.
Where is it?
Just tie him up and leave him.
No!
You know the way to Mordor.
We decided that Gollum should be very much a human-driven CG character.
Andy Serkis was cast to play the part of Gollum. Not just do the Gollum voice to animation, but to sort of be the soul or the spirit of Gollum. He drove the performance.
We all just want to make Gollum the most believable digital stroke being that's ever been created.
We'd actually go through the process of kind of rehearsing the scenes with him as any other actor. We'd shoot a reference pass. That would then go to the digital department, so it gives them a clear idea of how they want to animate.
The marriage of animation and motion capture has been absolutely fundamental on this.
After the reference pass, we would then act and interact with nothing. Thin air, which was interesting. And then he would go on to a motion capture stage and put on this tight suit and with all these kind of markers that would record his movements into the computer that would then be basically put onto the digital character.
So it got to be a guessing game, like what cool piece of technology is going to get pulled out of the box today? You know, is it going to be wires or the camera that slides down a thing, or are the crew going to be asked to build a crane on top of a precarious, mountain precipice?
I have a confidence in special effects. I don't think that Lord of the Rings is a film that should have been made by somebody who didn't really understand special effects, because it would have been very easy for the effects to overwhelm the story.
Their pace is quickened. They must have caught our scent.
Hurry!
We pick up with Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli doing what they were doing last, running as fast as they can, trying to catch Merry and Pippin and their captors.
You get into the race of the journey and the pressure against time, and to sort of put a stop to this evil that's coming in.
Éomer is the nephew of King Theoden and the third marshal of the Riders of Riddermark.
What business? There's an elf, a man, and a dwarf having the Riddermark. Speak quickly.
I remember sitting in the theatre at the end of the first film, and I just felt cold sweats of nervousness come over me. I thought, my God, that was so incredible. And then you think down to a year ahead when it's your turn. You just hope that it's good.
I would cut off your head, dwarf, if it stood but a little higher from the ground.
You would die before your stroke fell.
as you get caught up with the lives of the survivors. So it's a great delight and surprise, I think, as you turn the pages to realize that Gandalf is back.
It cannot be.
I come back to you now, at the turn of the tide.
The Two Towers takes us much more into the world of human beings than we did in the Fellowship of the Ring. And we go into the kingdom of Rohan, which is a very Viking-like, almost a sort of Scandinavian style civilization. And we meet the king of Rohan, Theoden.
The courtesy of your hall is somewhat lessened of late. Theoden, king.
He's not welcome.
Why should I welcome you, Gandalf Stormcrow?
You can't get any lower and still be breathing, considered alive, because he is virtually a zombie. There's nothing, he's an empty shell.
Late is the hour in which this conjurer chooses to appear. Last spell I name him. Ill news is an ill guest.
Be silent. Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth. I have not passed through fire and death to bandy crooked words with a witless worm.
There's an ancient king on his throne, being fed ill-advised by his wicked member of his staff.
Saruman corrupts Wormtongue. He is making Rohan weak, so it will fall to Saruman.
I have made my choice.
It's a sad time, it's a parting time for elves, because he knows that their time on this earth has come to an end.
He is not coming back. Why do you linger here when there is no hope? If Aragorn survives this war, you will still be parted. If Sauron is defeated and Aragorn made king and all that you hope for comes true, you will still have to taste the bitterness of mortality.
It's not this big, huge thing for her to give it up, because it's everything she wants to go with him and be mortal.
You learn a lot more about what's at stake for them, and perhaps why they're destined to at least try to be together.
And he understands that she's in love with Aragorn, but he also knows that elves have to leave.
The alliance between men and elves is over. Our time here is ending. Arwen's time is ending. Let her go.
You'll see Merry and Pippin alone, so they don't have Aragorn or Boromir or Gandalf to help them. So then they have to mature. They have to find a way to take hold of their own lives.
What's making that noise? It's the trees. What? Do you remember the old forest on the borders of Buckland? Folk used to say there was something in the water that made the trees grow tall and come alive. Alive.
And they find themselves with, I think, one of the most fascinating characters that Tolkien ever created. He created, in his mind, a walking, talking, living tree.
They had a huge tree beard, moving animatronic. And they had, part of his animatronic is he had these branches that were like hands that myself and Dom Monaghan, who plays Merry, could sit in. But they didn't make them very comfortable.
They pull at parts that maybe shouldn't be pulled at, and, you know, it kind of gets you down after a while, and you need kind of Vaseline at the end of the day.
And it was such a hassle to get us up there and hooked in that during tea breaks, they used to just leave us up there.
If that's the only thing that you can complain about at the end of a day, when all you've done is played with, you know, your friends on set, then, You know, it's no great hardship.
I always like to have a few laughs on set. I don't think it's particularly healthy for anybody to take this too seriously, no matter how big the movie and no matter how much money's being spent.
It's my new assistant. I'm sick of walking.
You know, he's the puppet master. He's the guy that pulls all the strings and keeps us all together. He is a 10th member of the Fellowship, without a doubt.
It's as if Pete Jackson has put as much depth into the movie telling of this story that Tolkien did in the book telling.
The ring of power within my grasp.
It's much more dynamic and exciting and more adventurous and darker and scarier.
Use the ring, Mr. Frodo. Just this once. Put it on. Disappear.
I can't.
This is the very spirit and essence of Tolkien. There will be no dawn for men.
It's the ring.
Frodo!
It's taking hold of you.
You have the gift of foresight. Tell me what you have seen.
He is not coming back.
The defenses have to hold.
They will hold. There is nothing for you here, only death.
There is still hope.
It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It was a journey that we all had the opportunity to take together.
The 9 of the Fellowship went into a tattoo parlour in Wellington.
I've always thought it was remarkable that Tolkien basically spent his entire life creating what he called the secondary world. You know, he created the languages, he created the thousands of years of history. It's so rich and so detailed that nobody today that writes a piece of fiction is ever going to come close to the sheer wealth of information and detail. Of course, all of that makes it fiendishly difficult to adapt into any sort of movie.
Behind one of the most ambitious film projects in history is the extremely popular book, the result of the life's work of one man. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born on the 3rd of January 1892 in Bloemfontein, South Africa, to English parents who had emigrated there. Just a month after his 4th birthday, when John Ronald was in Birmingham visiting his grandparents, his father, Arthur, died suddenly. Tolkien became half-orphaned in a country he didn't know.
The absence of a father would have affected him. In a way, he became the father to his younger brother. He was raised by his mother, who he was very close to.
In 1904, Mabel died from complications arising from diabetes. Tolkien was only 12.
After that, he was shuffling from one place to another with only a guardian to look after him.
There were something like 10 different houses he lived in the city. That life is quite a complicated one, quite an eventful one for a child.
His mother had been his first teacher, encouraging him to take an interest in words. Her death cemented his study of languages.
And I think in those circumstances, the school really was the refuge. It was the stable element in his life. And I also think it was a particularly good school for the likes of Tolkien. The school, I would say, was not remarkable for literary development, but it was very remarkable for producing linguists.
He formed a close bond with 3 school friends, and together they created the Tea Club of the Barovian Society, known as the TCBS, a small club based on the mutual love of heroic legends and sagas. This close friendship and shared interest in ancient languages continued throughout Tolkien's time in Oxford, where he went in 1911 to study English language and literature. But this idyllic period came to an end with the outbreak of war. Tolkien departed for France, serving as a lieutenant in the Battle of the Somme. Likewise, all of his close friends were drawn into the combat.
He had a small group of close friends, and a few years later, nearly all of them were dead, all killed in the First World War. Once again, he found himself on his own. How could it not have had a marked effect on the way he wrote and the way he thought? And people do say that the major theme of his writing is death.
During rare moments of quiet, he jotted down stories in a notebook, which he called the Book of Lost Tales.
That's where Middle-earth was born. Some of the very earliest writings of Middle-earth that Tolkien created were done in pencil on a notebook while he was in the trenches.
Tolkien's love of languages would eventually lead to him creating his own, and his lifelong pursuit of creating such language engendered the desire to create his own mythology.
He felt deeply that England lacked a mythology.
Well, England has no overriding mythology. We have a lot of folk tales, and we have borrowed a lot of other people's mythologies. The one that everybody regards as English is the story of King Arthur. But actually that's a complete mishmash from different sources, many of them French, our old enemy. So for Tolkien, the Romance mythologies were a very difficult thing. He didn't feel that they should be part of English folklore or mythology at all.
He really mourned the fact that any mythology that England may have had been basically eradicated by the Norman invasion in 1066. There was this vacuum that Tolkien wanted to fill by inventing his own English mythology. Right at the end of his life, he was still working on the mythology of Middle-earth, and he died with his great sort of life work only partially complete. The Silmarillion, which was the story that he was writing in the trenches in 1917, wasn't published until after his death, and his son Christopher had to step in and do the finishing touches.
Yet during his lifetime, elements of this mythology would reach the world through his novels. Tolkien returned to Oxford in 1925 as Professor of Anglo-Saxon, but 9 years later, an unexpected and seemingly innocuous event would change the life of this Oxford Don forever.
We have a story about Tolkien inventing hobbits. There he is, you know, marking his examination papers, which is extremely boring, and he turns over and he finds a blank sheet and he writes on it, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. And that's the start of the whole thing.
And so, the story of this small, nature-loving creature found its way into print.
Well, my father was the publisher, and he believed that children were the best judges of children's books. He used to pay me, as a supplement to my pocket money, a shilling.
Filmmakers, as writers, we had no interest whatsoever in putting our junk, our baggage into these movies. We just thought we should take what Tolkien cared about clearly, we should take those and we should put them into the film. This should ultimately be Tolkien's film, it shouldn't be ours. I first read The Lord of the Rings when I was 18. I loved the book, thought it would make a great film, assumed that somebody one day would make a live-action film and that I'd get to go along and see it.
I did find it was probably one of the first literary experiences that sort of really taught me the meaning of how powerful the written word is.
You know, I read the books when I was in sort of 20s, and so it always left quite a vivid memory.
I got hold of a copy from my dad when I was about 15, and he said, I'll give you about 6 months to read it. And I think I read it in about 2 months.
I've been a Tolkien fan ever since my mother first bought the book for me when I was 12 and said, oh, I think you might like this, have a read of this.
Yeah, well, I first read The Lord of the Rings in 1961, and at that point I was totally blown away from it. It was my first year in college, and I thought, this is something like I've never seen before.
The first copy of The Lord of the Rings that I ever owned was the paperback edition that had a still from the Ralph Bakshi film on the cover of the Black Riders galloping out of Bree was the image. I remember it really clearly. I've probably still got the book somewhere.
Virtually everyone in a significant position on the movie knew the books inside out, had been obsessed with them for years.
The first thing that Fran and I did was to take the 3 books of The Lord of the Rings and to break it down into what turned out to be a 90-page treatment.
I read that in the middle of '97 and immediately was stunned that they'd actually managed to. There was Lord of the Rings, essentially Lord of the Rings. So I became a believer.
It was our first pass at really cracking the code of The Lord of the Rings, is the way that I sort of think of it, as basically, you know, saying, well, the book is a great book, the story is a great story, the characters are great, but it's unfilmable, and it is unfilmable. If you were to just shoot the book page by page, scene by scene, it would just be a mess.
Here you've got a book that's 1,000 pages long. It encompasses a different geography, all kinds of races of beings and creatures. It's a book that took the author 15 years to write. This is a challenging book to try and put on film.
You know, I always find that literal adaptations don't work. I think you've got to find what you think is essential to the book and make your movie of that.
And in that way, you know, things started to happen, like, you know, lines that Elrond would say in the book were given to Aragorn to say in the movie. You know, a line that might appear in Lothlorien was suddenly, you know, put into the minds of Moria. But nonetheless, they're still Tolkien's language. It's still his words.
Miramax, of course, were the first people to finance Lord of the Rings. Credit has to be given to the fact that they were strong-minded enough to take on this incredible task.
We wrote the first screenplay. We immediately were going to start working on the second screenplay.
And sort of towards the end there, Miramax was starting to say, well, we really feel like we want to do it in one film.
And Peter said, there's no way I can tell this in one movie and do it any justice, so I can't do that.
And luckily, Miramax was like, hey, okay, fair enough. Well, you can go ahead and see if anybody else is interested.
We had one chance of continuing with the project. And I said, we've got to somehow convince somebody to make 2 Lord of the Rings films. We've got 4 weeks to do it.
And Peter trotted off to Hollywood, and he went to many of the studios and called upon his old friend Mark Gordeski, who was an executive at New Line. And Mark set up a meeting with Bob Shea.
Bob's impossible to read. He's a completely inscrutable sort of meeting. And you can't really tell how well you're doing. So he made this, Peter and Fran made the presentation, showed a lot of mock-ups, showed the tape, played the tape, lights came up, couldn't read the situation at all.
Bob looked at Peter and said, now, Peter, Why would anybody in their right mind make 2 movies?
Which shattered them both because they didn't quite know what he meant. He said, this is 3 films. Well, thank God for that decision.
Once New Line were on board, we had to basically take our 2 scripts that we'd written for Miramax, and we had to now reorganize these into 3 different movies. And that really involved a total restructuring, page 1 rewrite, basically. Philippa Boyens. She's one of those people that had read Lord of the Rings like once a year, every year, since she was 16 years old, and knew everything about Lord of the Rings. And so we invited Philippa on board.
The collaboration between the 3 of us came down to Fran and I working incredibly closely together, locked in the hotel rooms, locked in the office at home, getting the work done. Fran then taking it to Peter and reshaping. And often we'd come to bits where we knew there was action involved, so we'd just go, you know, they fight. And it turns into 20 minutes of the finished film. Because you just knew Peter was going to come along and do it brilliantly.
And they go.
And the reverse, I have to say, is true. Peter did that with the kissing. He would just say, he'd just hand it over to us and say, well, that's your department.
There are probably some times when it was a bit of 2 against 1, when it was actually Philippa and Fran, you know, going against Peter, and you know, he's like the only guy with these 2 women sort of pounding away on these issues.
It tends to be me on the laptop because I'm the fastest typist. I'm sorry, guys, but I am. Fran always, she likes to write by hand, and her scripts are the ones that are covered with writing. I like to keep my scripts really clean. It's scrawled all over. So she's usually sitting on the floor surrounded by notes, surrounded by the scripts, and lots of paper. And Peter would be, when he was shooting, he'd generally be lying on the couch completely exhausted because he'd just shot right through the week, and this was his day off, and he was working on the script.
The script was literally being rewritten, I'm not exaggerating, every single day and week for the entire 15-month shoot. I would get pages faxed to me several times a week. We were constantly updating them, partially because of the interaction with the actors.
We used to go around to Pete's house, which was great. And whoever was involved in the scenes, we'd go around and kind of chat through what that scene's about. And through that, a lot of the script kind of morphed into something else, you know.
Pete and Fran and Philippa sat us down, Billy and I primarily, and said, write down anything that you are doing that is making you laugh, you know, and try and link it in with something in the book.
There was a lot of plot lines that we sort of fleshed out, had ideas about certain specific characteristics more than anything. The idea of Frodo kind of playing with the ring and what would happen to him.
Philippa and Fran were great. You know, they were so enthusiastic. You know, they were so happy to I suppose, to be working on something like we all were. But I mean, there was great enthusiasm and passion in how they spoke and how they wanted to work with you. And it was never, you could ring them anytime, night or day. And if you had a problem, you could discuss anything with them.
I can remember going out to dinner one night and Philippa and I sitting at the end just dreaming, and her asking for a napkin or a matchbook from the restaurant just to write it all down on, because it was, you know, beautiful stuff what we were coming up with.
Sometimes you would start a scene one day, and under your door at night there would come a few rewrites through. When I say a few rewrites through, I have 2 file boxes that big, filled with rewrites. I have to tell you, some are still in the envelopes unopened, because I was sometimes so tired I thought, oh hell, never mind.
The actors who were now starting to own their characters were, you know, firing ideas to us, which, you know, I mean, some of them are good and some of them aren't, but you certainly gratefully accept the good ideas, you know, and this, you know, Fran described it as furiously laying the tracks in front of the train. It was as it was rumbling up behind you. There was no stopping the train, and the tracks just had to go down.
It made for a degree of sort of controlled chaos. The artistic result was terrific.
With our script writing, as every draft that we wrote, it became closer and closer to what was in the book. It became nearer to Tolkien.
They tried a lot of different things, and sometimes they were thought of going in a different direction from the book. And every time they tried to do that, gradually they'd find, and actually Tolkien knew what he was doing with the story, and they would start going back to where he had started.
I mean, there are things that sort of happened that I don't think were even within Peter's control that ended up changing the film and making it more like the book. It's almost like it was meant to be.
And so, you know, whilst we're changing plot things, we're changing some events, we're changing characters, we're losing characters, while we're doing all the normal stuff that you have to do to adapt a book, we did want to be as accurate as possible into putting his thematic material into the film. When you're doing 3 films back to back, the danger of the train derailing was huge. We knew we had to plan these movies as detailed as we possibly could, because there'd be very little room for error.
When Peter set out to start designing the film, he basically pre-visualized every shot. Sometimes with a high level of detail, sometimes just as a sketch.
It's to give everyone, including Peter, a good feel as to, okay, this is what the flavor of the film is, and he can then evaluate where scenes are running too long, even scenes that he may want to cut out entirely, all before he's wasting film, shooting actors and sets and having a crew costing tens of thousands standing around.
We knew we had to run a very tight ship, as it were, so that when we started shooting, we knew we'd get tired, we knew we'd get exhausted, that all sorts of pressures would descend on us, and we just had to have a great focused plan to be able to get us through each day.
When we were developing the movie, Peter spent an extensive amount of time committing the film in its entirety to storyboards.
And he ended up storyboarding all the films. You know, basically every frame we see in these films had already been storyboarded by Peter. And so we're able to work from visual reference.
The storyboarding process was the most basic form of pre-visualizing the film. It's 2D pencil drawings, single panels, nothing's moving. There's no real evidence of what the camera moves are going to be. You get an idea, okay, we pan from this character to this character, we tilt down from this object to that object, but we don't get any feel for how fast those camera moves are, or actually even the logistics.
Christian storyboarded most of the films that I made. I first met him when he was like a 17-year-old school kid.
When I'm storyboarding with Peter, I think I've got the luckiest job on the planet.
So you get a sort of an effect of the horses.
I sit down with him,
you know, would be
and he
kind of
describes
like
the shot to me. Usually I get it in the first drawing, sometimes I have to push it to 2. If it's a really difficult shot, I might have to just quickly do a third sketch.
Christian understands very much the sensibility that I have, and we started storyboarding as we were writing the script, so we didn't even wait for the script to be finished.
It's his way of checking that the ideas that he has for telling the story are going to work.
I mean, that is the single thing that I think storyboards are most valuable for me, is that they're a cheap pass at the movie. You know, I get to make the movie at a really, really low cost for the price of a few pencils and some paper. But it effectively has put me through the process of making the film. As a director, I've had a go. I've done version number 1, and I can get to look at the movie complete.
Which was a great tool. It was never intended, and never was, the final version of the movie. I've worked with some directors who will storyboard their film, and you'll really see those storyboards on screen. Peter's not that kind of a director. Peter uses it for inspiration, for communication with the departments, but you know that those storyboards are going to change. They're a starting point, not an end point for Peter. Not only doing the storyboards, but then having them shaded and then photographing them as an animatic.
We had made what we called an animatic, which was basically videotaping each frame of the storyboards.
The storyboards are all, they're digitized, they're edited together as the shots will or would be edited together in the film, and it's basically a little black and white 2D drawing version of the film itself.
We'd got some local New Zealand actors together in a studio, and there was 5 or 6 actors, and they had read through the script in a recording studio, playing the different characters, and then those voice tracks had been edited with the storyboards.
What are you doing?
Fried eggs, sausages, and nice crispy bacon.
I've saved some for you, Mr. Frodo. You idiots! Put this out!
Was looking at a version like of the Lord of the Rings as almost like a comic book with words, and we put temp music with it.
You're seeing the storyboards as they pace in the film, as you want them to pace in the film, and so you get a feeling for the progression of story and the pacing of the storytelling.
Peter told us about it, and he was like, all right, I'll screen it for you before we start filming. And we all got to Pete's house, and he screened us this animatic, and it was a trip to read the script and talk about the script and get ready for the process of making the film, and then suddenly see a very rough compilation of those ideas put onto the screen. I mean, in some ways, we'd felt like we'd watched the film. What was great about that is the script was powerful enough that it actually came across and it resonated in that rough form.
And what we did on this movie, which I'd never done before, is I wanted to go one more stage with the storyboards and make them more accurate than they usually are. Grant Major would draw up the final plans for each set that had been designed.
Some of these were initially made into architectural models, which were made fairly quickly.
We ended up calling them animatic models, and we used them so that Peter could actually get a lipstick camera, get little toys. You know, we get little figurines that we always had, like Hobbit size, you know, human size, you know, Balrog size. We had all these little toys, and it was great. He could actually have them in this little, you know, model that was either a reference point for the set or for a miniature down the road.
So the storyboards that he had done previously were expanded on shot by shot by the use of his camera working around our models.
And we'd have it hooked up to a video monitor that I'd have a freeze frame function on. And he'd say, okay, that's, you know, sometimes you'd just sit there and you'd see him sort of, you know, just pottering around, just trying to work out what kind of camera move he'd want to do for this shot. And you'd place the figures, and he'd, you know, okay, that's the frame, I'd pause it and then draw from the screen.
Christian could actually sit there and go, okay, so you're thinking this frame, yeah, okay. And then he could actually draw out, sketch out the storyboard that was reflected on the monitor that actually, you know, was to scale. That, you know, that was showing something that had the figure to the background all to scale and made sense and could actually be replicated when you thought about what you were shooting on the set.
We basically knew that we were publishing a set of storyboards that were actually accurate, that this angle was here, and when we finally walked onto the set in a year's time with the actors and the full set was built, we'd be able to find exactly the same angle.
Yeah, you will keep an eye on Frodo, won't you?
Yes, I will. 2 eyes as often as I can spare them.
Scene 12, shot 1.
I was very worried about Bad Again because I knew just how small the set was, and once you get 50 or 60 crew members in there, it's going to become cluttered very quickly and very difficult to work in. And so I wanted just to be able to really get my head into how we would shoot these scenes. And I'd done my little lipstick camera mock-ups with a cardboard model some months earlier, because we were also trying to figure out ways to shoot the scales too, because we had Gandalf had to be tall, and Bilbo and Frodo happened to be small, and we were starting to get our heads into how we were going to shoot all this stuff. And I got a few of the people on the film. So we turned up on a Sunday on set with a video camera. I played Bilbo, and Rick Porus played something, and we sort of did a mock-up of the entire scene that we were going to shoot, ultimately with Ian McKellen and Elijah and Ian Holm. And then again, it turned out to be a relatively accurate. I mean, I think we made script changes eventually, so things altered a bit, but it turned out to be a relatively accurate version of what ultimately was in the film.
Through me, that ring would wield a power too great and terrible to imagine.
Beyond the storyboarding, we also did like another level of planning, which is sort of like bringing the storyboards to life in a variety of ways. And it's called pre-visualization, is what it's called, previs.
Pete was able to use previs to help him tell his story. He wanted to turn a lot of his 2D storyboards into 3D moving cameras. He's a very dynamic filmmaker. He likes big sweeping camera moves.
Just at the ideal moment while we were in pre-production, Rick McCallum, the producer of Star Wars, came to New Zealand on a trip, and I was talking to Rick about the whole pre-visualization process, and they'd obviously basically developed their own previs department for Star Wars. And so Rick said, look, if you're ever in the States, come by and visit, and we'll show you what we've done. And so a few weeks later, we were in San Francisco and visited the ranch, and he was incredibly generous at just basically introducing us to their previs department.
Rick McCallum and George Lucas have been incredibly helpful to him and to the rest of us in terms of just offering up advice with some of these new approaches that they were doing. So Peter really grabbed a hold of this idea and said, hey guys, this is something we should be doing. So what we did was we went out and we searched for young recent graduates of graphic art schools and the kind of folks that love film and have a passion for film, maybe wanting to try to make a foray into the world of visual effects, and this could be an interesting opportunity for them.
Previs is doing about 144 shots from film 1. The workshop and the art department provide the designs that we use in Previs to build in the computer. The shots that we're working on are effects shots and anything that Peter can't really get his head around, that he wants to take a look at it in the 3D environment, and that's what Previs is for, to help Peter create his vision.
Peter was very much present in Previs, and he'd come in, very exciting to him to see his movie coming to life and trying out the camera angles on sets that hadn't been built yet. First thing we did was the whole Khazad-dûm stair chase. We built basically a copy of Alan's drawing sort of in 3D in a computer and began to experiment with angles and shots. The miniature of the staircase was also constructed by Richard Taylor. The actual miniature that ended up being used in the movie was one of the very first miniatures that Richard built, and so we were able to also use that miniature to plot a lot of camera angles of the planet. And so, gradually over the course of possibly a year, this drawing of Alan Lee's had inspired and led to the creation of this hugely complicated, hugely expensive scene. Peter cut out a lot of bits, but it was even wilder. You had Frodo's point of view going down the stairs, and it's like going, running like this and up at him and nearly falling off, all this close work on them. And in some ways, and tripping and falling and rolling down right almost to the breach and being grabbed at the end, and looking over, and then the arrows start coming, It was, it was wilder, but eventually it got to the point where, you got to cut somewhere. Too bad.
And obviously it's a fantastic tool, and it just became apparent, well, that's a tool I'm going to need to use to help create these films. Christian Rivers storyboarded the film with me, which is sort of continuing. I mean, even today he's still working, doing storyboards for the 2000 Return of the King, and he's been working on this for probably, it must be nearly 4 to 5 years now. I find that scenes that were born in Previs are often the more imaginative scenes, because you feel brave when you're just devising these crazy shots with little computers and stuff, but ultimately those crazy shots play an important part in defining the style of the film.
That's where I feel like I've been able to learn from him, because it's the stuff that I was sure wouldn't work that he makes work. And one of the things that I said to myself when I came down here was, I already know what I know, but I don't know what he knows. So I'm going to keep my eyes open, because he does a lot of things that shouldn't work but do. And that's the fun of it, is hearing something that sounds just impossible at the beginning and then seeing how he puzzles it out. I think one of the remarkable things about reading The Lord of the Rings is you go into this world which is, fairy tale. It's dragons and it's trolls and it's hobbits and it's elves. And it's amazing how authentic, genuinely authentic it feels, that you start to believe that it could possibly be history, that somehow told a true historical events. It has that degree of believability about it. I guess the way that we tried to hint at the depth, which is all that the film can really do, was partly in our design process. While we were working on the screenplay, we were able to start a team of people designing. Because the great thing about Tolkien is that all the descriptions of what you need to build are in the book. You don't actually have to wait for the script to finish, unlike you would on a normal movie. I didn't want movie design. I didn't want fantasy movie, Hollywood sort of style of design. I wanted something that felt authentic. I gave a little speech to the design crew very early on, where, and this is a little bit weird, but it was the only way I could really express myself. I said, look, we've been given the job of making The Lord of the Rings, but I want to, from this point on, I want to think that The Lord of the Rings is real, that it was actually history, that these events happened. And more than that, I want us to imagine that we've been lucky enough to be able to go on location and shoot our movie where the real events happened. Those characters did exist and they wore costumes, and I want the costumes to be totally accurate to what the real people wore. Hobbiton still exists. It's overgrown with weeds and it's been run down and neglected for the last 300 or 400 years, but we're going to go back in there and clean it up. We're the luckiest film crew in the world. We were able to shoot in the real locations that these real events actually took place in, and that was effectively my speech, to try to get everybody's head into what I actually sort of wanted in terms of a feeling of reality. You basically start thinking about what the places and the characters look like, and you realize that there's 40 years of artwork that people have done. And out of all the illustrations, all the artwork that's been done in calendars and books and, you know, album covers and all sorts of things, the work of Alan Lee and John Howe impressed us the most. We had their artwork literally pinned on the wall of our office for 12 to 14 months while we were working on the screenplay. But I also thought it would be wonderful if we actually had these guys involved in the film as conceptual artists, because we had, by this stage, totally locked into their artwork. And I remember it was incredibly difficult to find Alan Lee, who's a fairly reclusive chap, and nobody really had a phone number for him. So we eventually tracked him down to a small village near Dartmoor in England. We put together a package and we FedExed us to this address, and we were tracking the FedEx. But we were literally tracking the van moment by moment. Jan, our assistant, was on the phone and she was saying, right, the van's about 50 miles from the village. And then she phoned back, yes, it's arrived in the village, it's just looking for a street. And then we got a call back from FedEx saying, yes, so it's been delivered. And we knew at that exact moment that Alan had signed for this thing at his front door and he'd got it.
He sent over a copy of Heavenly Creatures, which I'd heard of, which hadn't seen, and enjoyed very much, with a letter telling me what he was up to, and asking if I'd like to get involved.
We thought, oh well, he'll probably get in touch in a day or two. Okay, well at least it's there. We'll just wait and see. And about 3.5 hours later, Alan phoned up. He got our phone number. He phoned up, and 3.5 hours he'd sat down. He'd watched Heavenly Creatures all the way through. He'd watched Forgotten Silver all the way through, and then he picked up the phone and spoke to me.
I didn't really need to think about it, actually. I just sort of said, yes, I'll come out.
And John Howe was similar. We tracked down John Howe, who lives in Switzerland. I spoke to John on the phone, and I was just nervous on these phone calls. I was just like a kid.
It was about 2 or 3 in the morning, because somebody in New Zealand hadn't really thought about what time it was in where we lived in Switzerland. And there was Peter and Fran on the phone, making a very, very sincere sales pitch for the project. And it was really a question of waiting for them to finish so I could say yes.
And then in the space of probably within 2 or 3 weeks, Alan and John were flying to New Zealand, and they actually met each other for the first time. These are 2 renowned Tolkien artists that had never met each other before. They met each other on the plane flying to New Zealand.
It started off very much on an illustrator's level, where it was nothing but pencils and paper, meetings, ideas, sketches.
And we joined in with Weta's team of designers as well, who'd already been working on the project.
A vital person in the design process was Richard Taylor, who's a New Zealander, and Richard's worked on almost every film that I've made, certainly since Meet the Feebles. And Richard has the most wonderful team of designers who work with him at Weta, and You know, as Alan Lee and John Howe were working on their conceptual design, so too were Richard and his team.
Initially, we had Alan Lee and John Howe working in our facility as well. Because they were here, we were able to utilise their immense knowledge of the world of Middle-earth and lift our young New Zealand designers to a level that was capable of accomplishing the massive task ahead.
I wanted Grant Major to design the film, and Grant had worked with me on Heavenly Creatures and the Frighteners.
New Zealand has never done a project on this sort of scale before. I'd never done a project on this scale before. So we were sort of breaking new territory a lot with the way we planned these things and keeping a large amount of people motivated and able to meet deadlines and keep up a standard of work through a very, very long period of time.
I wanted Dan Henner to be our art director, who'd done the Frighteners. You know, very important that those guys are part of the New Zealand film industry. They know how to get that stuff made and built here in New Zealand. The design process was a lot of fun. I would simply go and walk around and talk to them and give them thoughts, and you just narrow things down.
Peter will come in and we'll put a whole bunch of drawings up on the wall, a couple hundred drawings that we've been doing over the past few days.
We'd each have 2 or 3 different takes on any particular environment.
I sort of tend to like, I relate quite well to that as a silhouette shape. I mean, I think it has a sort of elegance to it.
We start doing drawings, and we get a little way with the drawings, and then, you know, after based on the feedback that Pete gives us, we start going into sculptures.
It was like being in a toy shop, really, and just being able to say, oh, I want one of those and one of those, and let's have 3 of those, and, you know, and being able to sort of work all these designs up.
Occasionally you would do a single drawing and Pete would go, that's it, love it, that's great, follow that line. Other times we would put up, in the case of the Urukai, a couple of hundred drawings before we got anywhere near what Pete was actually wanting.
You know, Peter's got a very good eye. You know, he knows what he's asked for, and when you've got to give him solid designs.
He would always find some positive aspect to everything that was done, but he would also be able to make you feel you weren't quite there yet. And you'd go away thinking to yourself, I've got to get this right. And it was really stimulating, really, really stimulating, and many, many times he pushed Alan and I much, much farther than we would have normally gone on our own in a design process.
We tried to give all the different cultures a very distinctive design. We wanted the dwarfish culture to be very, very distinctly different from, the Gondorian or the Elvish.
Everything about the way that character's dressed, the way they move, the colours that they wear, the shapes that are on their clothing, on their weaponry, on their armour. We wanted to make it look like you could look at a piece of architecture and tell if it was dwarven or elven immediately just by looking at it. If you looked at a weapon and then you looked at the architecture, you could tell which cultures were the same and which were different. So that meant establishing iconic designs. It's graphic design really at its basic level. Dwarves at a basic level, their shapes are square, they're rigid, they're sturdy, very much like the character of the dwarves. The elven stuff, very lyrical, very beautiful, very sinuous, very elegant. So that kind of thought went into it, and into establishing very clear and identifiable graphic styles for all the different races that would carry through all their design influences.
We were also trying to hint at this whole notion of art history. Much of Middle-earth was actually constructed by the Numenorians. So the bones of the architecture of Middle-earth were built by a people who are no longer there. But some hint of this has to come through.
The idea of layers of civilization going back over thousands of years, which it's a very hard thing to do in a film or to achieve on a film set. But just by, laying much more design into the development of every part of the film, whether it's props or costumes, or armour or buildings, that we'd never actually really see on film, but its presence would be felt in some sort of strange way.
When I first came onto the film, I began the same day as Alan Lee and John Howe. I spent the time myself designing from an architectural point of view from the illustrations that John and Alan had done. Some of these were initially made into architectural models.
I think we have to be very careful. We have to get rid of some of these little thin, tendrily ones.
As Peter agreed with various stages of the design, we called it a lock-off, a PJ lock-off. He would say, yes, okay, proceed. And we would proceed to the next step. we had a little star-shaped stamp made which had PJ approved on, because these approvals were very, very critical to us. We really weren't able to move on until he had seen and agreed to what we were doing. At about that time, we were having a series of meetings. We were pigeonholing things about what would become sets, what would become part set, part model, and then what would become part set, part model, and part computer graphic extensions. A lot of it was strategic design for how we were going to get to the point where we could start rolling the cameras, and start filming sets.
It's a pretty magical vista around here. There's no doubt.
It's nice having its own little valley in a way.
I think we should go and relocate into a couple of. I remember our first trip to the Hobbiton location, or the potential location at that point, and there was this great moment occurred when Alan Lee and John Howe pulled out their sketch pads. They always went everywhere with pencils and paper.
You could sit in that landscape and see Hobbiton, almost as if you could do an overlay in front of your eyes. And Alan and I sat down on the hill above Bag End and started to draw, because there was the perfect landscape for Hobbiton.
So we were actually drawing the landscape, but putting the hobbit holes and the gardens and the fields and everything.
They were transforming the landscape on paper, and I just thought this is a great moment. And I remember we had a video camera there, so I actually grabbed the video camera because I thought this has got to be on the DVD, and I grabbed the video camera and I actually filmed myself. I filmed some stuff of them, in this moment where they were sketching. Yep. Let me just get a close up in here, and then I'll let you get this still.
And the final look of the finished set, I don't know, a year later or whatever, was quite close to those original sketches.
The style of Hobbiton was first and foremost to be homely and familiar. So it has a kind of an Englishness to it that I think Tolkien would have liked us to use.
We talked to Peter and he said, why don't Hobbiton? We want Hobbiton to look beautiful. It's got to have long grass. It's got to look as though the grass has been there forever. It's got to have fruit trees with fruit on them. It's got to have hedges with leaves on them. It's a big place. How much lead-in time do you think you need to make it look as though it's always been there? We said, well, a year would be good. Okay, yeah, I think we could do a year, and so we started planning from a very early age with Hobbiton that we would begin construction a year out from filming.
Okay, so today we're going to Hobbiton, and briefly, actually, Peter, this is the first time Peter is having a look at our work. Since we found the location, we've conceptualised it with Peter's involvement back in Wellington. We've had builders up here, landscapers, and the army in here to build roads, and a huge amount of effort and time and money being spent on it without Peter actually having been here to vet it. We've been reporting back to him with as much as we can with photographs and videos and kind of verbal questions and what have you. But this is the first day Peter's actually going to see it, and it's going to be great because he's either going to like it or he's not.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, we just need to get a lot of bushes and sort of make it more wild and woolly and sort of overgrown. But are they a few little bushes that are going down there?
They're doing gardens.
Right.
But I've told them just to keep putting bushes in until Christmas.
Yeah.
It's all around the chimneys, all around this stone wall.
Yeah.
Along the fence lines and things ought to be scrubbed.
The fence lines, there should be stuff all around the fence lines, yeah. You don't want those to be too clean.
And as part of the sort of general process of building it, we built a model of it in our art department computer.
Parallel to this, we built a huge architectural model. It would have been, 4 or 5 metres square. This would have been about a year and a half out from filming.
Once we'd found the location and worked out what we required there, we had to shift 5,000 cubic metres of earth. We had to drain a swamp, fill it in, make the party field. We had to build a big oak tree above Bag End, and then of course we had to build some sort of little hillocks to have hobbit holes.
And we cut into our little hillocks the fronts of where the hobbit holes were going to be. We sowed grass over the hills. We planted little market gardens and we planted trees.
Another little hobbit hole. Feel like knocking on the door and popping in for a cup of tea. Second breakfast, perhaps.
Once all these things have been planted, it was really a matter of keeping it all going, letting nature take its course over the year. It was a very long and organic process, designing and building it, but you know, I'd like to think that the Hobbiton needed that scale of detail to work well.
John and I, obviously, we each had quite a backlog of work that we'd done with these stories, so there were certain images that Peter had really liked.
A good example is the front hall of Bag End, because Peter had in mind an image that I'd done for a map of the Hobbit several years before.
That was just the most brilliant image of what the inside of the Bag End front hall might be like. And I basically just said, look, you know, this is what I want in the movie. I've been looking at this picture for like 2 years now, wondering what the rest of Bag End is like. So can you please draw me the rest of Bag End? And he did it, and that was a great thrill of saying, you know, taking this hallway and then having the actual artist, John, like extend it into all the other rooms.
Suggestion of something behind. I don't think you'd need to do anything detailed. Wells is a scenic artist, and he's doing the view from Strider's room at the Prancing Pony, and that's the view from the room. Just talking about Paul's lovely painting of the broad view of Bree.
Bree was a lot simpler to design than many of the other ones because it was relying a lot more on vernacular English period architecture. We built most of Bree as a set piece, so it only exists in one instance as a computer-generated wide shot. So yeah, we built it in what used to be an old Navy base here in Wellington, in Fort Dorset, and used one or two existing streets on which to build the set.
We worked on making everything quite tall, quite thin, slightly off plumb, as it were, so the buildings all felt as though they were leaning in over you. And then the Prancing Pony itself, that whole scale issue once again came into play, where all the tables and chairs were big, all the people were huge, you know, and our little guys were sort of slightly vulnerable, and so everything, there was a darkness, a slightly gothic edge to Bree.
The Weathertop Hill was actually quite difficult to find that location. It's described as being a hill like a cone, and the one that we found for the movie actually doesn't quite fit that description, but it's more interesting, and we just thought that this was a wonderful weathertop. We just had to put ruins on the top of the hill.
It's the possible western Weathertop Hollow, and there's the escape vehicle cast on the muddy road. Oh, it's going to be a long walk.
So the ruins and the wide shots are just put in with a computer, but when the hobbits are actually within that circle of ruins, they are in a studio set.
Basically, it's a ruined tower that once held one of the Palantirs. We've built, really, from the Tolkien's basic description of the ruins of a circular tower. We've added these statues, which they're not complete yet. They're going to be more broken down. I've never done this before. And the figures were sculpted by Brigitte, who's one of our very talented sculptors. But as a sculptor, she's probably not the person to be actually attacking them and aging them down. I guess they just sort of represent some element of the kind of the age of this place, but they're also kind of like a brooding presence, a kind of foreboding what's about to happen. Spectators, really, of the events that can unfold in this arena.
Isengard comes directly from an illustration of Alan's, which Peter loved so much he wanted exactly the same, but Alan had only drawn the bottom portion.
I always looked at that painting wondering what the rest of the tower was like. I just wondered how high is it and what's the top of it like, and because it was just such a brilliant painting. And so the day finally arrived, I could say to Alan, can you paint me the rest of the tower, please? Can you show me what the rest of it is like?
It is described as being black by Tolkien, so we chose obsidian volcanic glass as the element that had been made from. So we wanted to give it a sharp, blade-like, hard, aggressive quality.
We built the structure out of a normal framework and polystyrene, and then we coated it with a hard coat, black hard coat, and then a clear hard coat. So we built up the sort of layers of lacquer, virtually, to give it a depth, so at the pointy edges you could see through it. And then we waxed it, which gave it even more sort of texture to the depth.
There was a lot of different elements in that design. Everything feels like it belongs in that one place. And it was another really satisfactory set to work on. It wasn't a place I particularly wanted to spend a night, but it would be a nice place for a very sophisticated cocktail party. Yeah, at the moment I'm just trying to draw this as a landscape, just exactly as I would if I were, sitting in the wood drawing something for pleasure, and then kind of adding in the various architectural elements that I'm kind of making up as I go along. Really, I'm just trying to get a feeling of the place as it is and its potential as a place for the elves.
How do you define a culture which could be eternal, that could be forever perfecting itself? You have to search for some form of simplicity which can allow you to stop evolving and find that perfect line.
It's the use of natural forms. It's the use of flowing, graceful lines. There are kind of elements of Art Nouveau and Celtic design, but it is quite an intuitive, enigmatic thing. It's not something that's easy to kind of pin down. With Rivendell, I think I was trying to create a place that I'd want to retire in. It's just this ideal environment in a beautiful Lost Valley, and the whole thing would feel slightly kind of melancholic and quiet, and also you get the sense that it was a centre of learning, that there'd been libraries and statues, works of art.
The Rivendell exterior sets were built in a small regional park called Kaitoki, just north of Wellington.
It's a sort of peculiar set in that it's inside out, so the trees grow inside the buildings are built around the trees. It's very much as Lothlorien was, at one with nature, at one with its sort of foliage.
And we made a model of the woods and placed every tree, and then just made a small scale versions of the buildings, and just worked out a way that we could place the buildings in a way that wouldn't damage any trees, and that the buildings would have kind of openings which allowed for the trees to grow, so that you'd feel that the trees had grown up around these buildings which have been there for 1,000 years or so. Yeah, it was just one of those places that I personally wanted to spend a lot of time. I even thought about sleeping overnight in Frodo's bed, but I don't think the props people would have been quite happy about that. The next major thing was the interiors of Elrond's chamber and the council chamber, which was built in the studio. And again, that was a very lovely set.
The dressing of Elrond's house reflects Elrond having this world-renowned library in his house. It also forms in part a museum of all these significant events, and in particular the fall of Barad-dûr for the first time, and the loss of the ring. So this is manifested in a lot of sort of prop detailing, but most of all in Narsil, the broken sword is present as a centerpiece in this museum, and also along the walls are a series of paintings or frescoes, one or two of them done by Alan Lee.
They basically were the history of the elves, and they're the most beautiful, stunning pieces of artwork. The boats that they arrived in, the making of elven rings. The centrepiece is Sauron smashing Narsil, and then there's various other pieces of elven history on either side.
The mines of
huge trees quite like these in New Zealand, so we had to build some trees, and we did it up at Paradise with a beautiful moss-covered ground in the beech forest, and then we built 5 huge, like 16-foot diameter trees that went up 40 feet high into the air. Once they've made contact with the elves, you move on into Carrascaladon, this is where the melon trees are. So we built essentially built the melon trees in the studio. And gave them great big root structures that the guys could have a little settlement under, their sort of pavilion. I think there was that essence that the elves were at one with nature, with the forest. They were part of it, as opposed to being dominating it. They were working with it. Whereas we would have gone in with a chainsaw and cleared a place and built a house, they've done the opposite. They've gone in and worked with the trees and added staircases and put in flats that they could live on in perfect crotches of trees, things like that.
Galadriel's Glade was quite a nice little set. This was our first look at the actual Lothlorien trees, and was trying to kind of establish the look of the roots and everything. Then follow that through with the design of the plinth and the bowl and the vase, and it was very nice actually seeing that scene coming together. Galadriel has always been a hugely important character for me in the books, so to see Kate Blanchett standing in Galadriel's Glade was very, very nice, very exciting.
We're at the Silverlode Riverbank in Featherston, which is where Galadriel gives all our hobbits and the Fellowship we present as they leave Lothlorien. We built a bit of a malorn tree here, 6 metres high and about 6 metres in diameter, with roots that run out into the lake, so that we can pull up our boats into the roots. To build it, we did a timber frame, put chicken mesh and foil over that with hessian on it, then plastered the whole thing, then given it all a coat of paint in the rain. We've eventually ended up with a really interesting texture there that could look 1,000 years old.
From the moment we see the Argonaths of the Númenóreans, as they were in the Second Age. Now the Argonaths were like 2 sentinels on the outside of one of the approaches to this huge empire.
We wanted to give the feeling that we were, just rearranging the realm of this very, very ancient civilization, long past its prime. It's like kind of ancient Rome or Egypt or Mesopotamia.
It's almost as if you're digging things out of the ground rather than actually creating them.
The ruins themselves are based on the architecture of men, some of which we had seen before, for example on Weathertop. So we kept back a lot of our ruined pieces, knowing that we were going to need them later on in the filming. And we made a few new ones, like this gigantic face that was lying on its side.
The seeing seat itself at the top has got these eagle motifs, suggesting that because eagles have this acute vision, that's kind of connected with what Frodo is going to see. New Zealand doesn't have a lot of ancient stones and stuff around the landscape. Everything had to be introduced, and it's mainly made of polystyrene. But I think it, did the trick really. It just made you feel that you were in a very, very ancient land.
Are we going to have like sort of big pumpkins and sort of stuff, and where you have a little guy kind of who's just scored a good cheap bloody
Bye.
Propping for the film is an industry in itself. The film demanded a particular type of prop that you just don't get in the prop shops or antique shops. So we had to build up our own props department and build everything from scratch. We also had to do it because of scale. We were constantly needing to duplicate different props at different scales.
A huge amount of stuff had to be made, and it meant designing everything, you know, the whole thing. Absolutely crazy. But I think this is one of the strengths of The Lord of the Rings, is because everything had to be designed. There were no shortcuts. There was no sort of going out and picking something off a shelf. Had to put a bit of thought into it.
We've lengthened that, put a bit more of a curve in it, and straightened the bowl, so you've got it down in this sort of position. The bowl is actually straight.
Looks good. Looks good. Looks good.
Every pipe, every chair, every cup, saucer, glass, everything was designed specifically for the film. So we had to make it.
We did have to look for people with these sorts of skill bases within the community, people who can make the one ring. Those sorts of things were contracted out to craftspeople, silversmiths, art makers, saddlery makers.
We got a glass blower and we got some furniture makers and some wood carvers, a chap who could make clay pipes, coopers to make barrels and buckets, wheelwrights to make wheels for wagons. It starts off at the conceptual area, but it works right through down to the ground level. Guy who's applying the aging to a wooden bucket to make it look as though it's carried water for 300 years, you know.
Yeah, just doing these little buttons that in 2 scales for this chest here, it's little babies, and getting them exactly the same.
And finding these sorts of people who are willing to work day and night for a year, 2 years, to make the amount of props we needed was huge.
As a props department, art department, we took responsibility for the ring. Had it made by an absolutely wonderful master, silversmith, goldsmith, Jens Hansen. Something like 15 rings made of that sort of vaguely fell into the description that Peter had given and Tolkien had obviously written about. So Rick Porras, our co-producer, was there during one of these discussions one day about the ring. And
the next day we ended up shooting this little sequence where we all sort of played these different characters, and we needed a prop, so I pulled off my wedding ring.
And action. Frodo!
When we were done, I said, you know, Pete, I actually think that, you know, obviously I'm biased, but I really like the way my wedding ring looks.
And, you know, everyone loves their wedding ring. But anyway, it had a sort of shape to it that just had a nuance that was slightly different from the others. And so we took that with us the next time we went to Jens Hansen to talk about the design of the ring. And
making some adjustments after that, they kind of rounded it off a bit, but sort of they used that as, I guess, a basic starting point for the one ring.
And action.
It's been a huge kind of collaborative process all the way through, and there hasn't been a great kind of division of your labour, and so you've had people who might have been brought on as painters who suddenly find themselves sculpting or kind of hammering stuff together, and so I've done my share of kind of heaving props around and gardening, pushing wheelbarrows full of gravel.
The film was epic in every sense of the word. There was 3,000 people in the crew, 300 people in the art department.
Everyone was dedicated to what they were doing, even if they weren't great Tolkien fans before they started working on the picture. They took it on board, they lived with it, they became part of Middle-earth.
So much more went into making this movie than can ever appear in the movie itself.
That was the aim right from the beginning, to create a world that you felt had been in existence for hundreds of thousands of years.
Being able to think of it and see it as something that is real certainly made it real, you know. And now it does exist, you know. It does exist somewhere.
Weta Workshop was kind of like visiting some wild fantasy land. It's like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, but without the candy.
I went to the Weta Workshop, which is quite unlike anything I've ever seen in my entire career, and they made everything that you see in the film. They made all the armor, all the weapons. Richard Taylor, the man in charge, I think he's a genius.
He's built this workshop that is world-class in every respect.
Richard Taylor has also been one of the single most important people involved on this production, because Richard has, with enormous dedication and enthusiasm, taken on one of the most difficult jobs.
We chose to look after the design, the fabrication, and the on-set operation of the special makeup effects and prosthetics, the armor, the weapons, the creatures, and the miniatures.
I think Richard made over 45,000 different items for the film, including the miniatures and the prosthetics.
So his workload over the 3 or 4 years that he has been involved has just been phenomenal.
He's a very charismatic guy, so a very great leader. So his people were really devoted to him and to the task, and their work showed it.
Employing mainly young people whose primary expertise was not in filmmaking, but whose talents had been recognized by Richard Taylor because they were artists of one sort or another.
The Weta Workshop is very much a physical and spiritual extension of Richard Taylor and Tanya Roger, because it embodies every molecule of philosophy of Richard's work ethic.
So where do I start? Peter has told me that he wants to make Lord of the Rings, and a great fortune for us, he wants to make it with us. How do I inspire in this young group of New Zealand designers and technicians the philosophies and the vision that will carry this film for 5 years and deliver it onto the world stage in a way that's worthy to the written literature of Tolkien? Gathering around us a like-minded group of young New Zealanders, I very much believed, as I do today, what I said to them then. If you couldn't rise to the highest level of enthusiasm, passion, and professionalism and grasp this task as if it was the most important thing that you have ever taken on in your life, you weren't worthy of the task. We had been blessed with the opportunity to bring a piece of modern English folklore to the screen. So often in fantasy filmmaking, it's necessary that the actor occasionally turns to the audience and throws them a wink. You know, just buy into this, just accept that this world exists. That couldn't happen with The Lord of the Rings. It was imperative that Middle-earth was real.
Kind of like a prehistory to English and European history, that it did exist at one point. And since he was treating it that way, he was looking at it as a history, that really kind of worked its way through every fabric of the production.
But what we appreciated was that if we could hold on to a large number of the departments, we could possibly make a more cohesive approach through our design work and the delivery of the images that we put on screen.
Richard Taylor's philosophy was always ground this in reality. We want gritty realism. We're making a historical film, we're not making a fantasy film. To that end, we looked at a lot of historical influences. While we didn't want to make it obvious, like you go, oh look, the elves are Greek or the dwarves are this or that. We didn't want to make it obvious like that because that's not what we're doing. What we wanted to create were alternative cultures that looked like they could come straight out of history, but you're never quite sure where they're from.
The development of the cultures, the species, and the races. The development of the total physical reality of the creatures was imperative, so that this finely woven tapestry would create a backdrop of heightened reality upon which the actors could play out this incredible story.
There are so many races and cultures in Lord of the Rings, and it would be very easy for many of us as designers who are familiar with the material to really indulge ourselves a little bit in it and just develop these cultures to the nth degree. But what we needed to do was really make them so they were accessible to general audiences who hadn't read the Lord of the Rings as well.
Daniel seemed to grasp everything that was good in Middle-earth. All the elves, the beautiful swords that the elves carry. He was able to design the richness of the cultures of these particular characters. But brooding underneath the harsh cloud of Mordor on the other side of the room was Warren Mahi. He looked after the Uruk-hai. He did a lot of the orc design, the goblins, anything that was nasty and spiky came out of Warren's pencil. A year into our design process and a year into the project, we had the great fortune of Alan Lee and John Howe joining us.
We'd already adopted some of their sort of stylistic interpretations into our interpretation. However, when they came on board, it really gave us a solid grounding and also a tremendous upskilling and a tremendous experience base to draw from, because here are these amazingly talented guys who've been living and dreaming Tolkien for years.
They'd broken a lot of ground for the weaponry, the armor, and the creatures, which was their primary mandate. And because we were working on the same floor, in the same set of buildings, there was a lot of fraternization going on. We would be, above all me, I'd be wandering out to see what they were up to and see what they were drawing, and it was very stimulating because seeing someone else treat any given subject, you've got only one desire, is to have a shot at it yourself.
Everything was kind of thrown into the melting pot, really, and people would give us feedback, and we'd go off and do another day's work and have something ready for the next design meeting.
Now, Jamie Best-Warwick and Mike Asquith didn't draw. They're sculptors, and they can conceptualize through three-dimensional sculpture as quickly as an illustrator can come up with ideas through drawing. We always start off with tiny little what we call thumb maquettes, tiny little studies that are done extremely quickly that just begin to capture the feeling of form. And then from those, working on top of precast either third scale busts or sixth scale figures, we'll conceptualize the characters. Jamie Best-Warwick did a number of original sculptures, one-offs, that are in the final film today. It was incredible how quickly he was able to capture Peter's vision and deliver designs that carried on through to final shots on screen.
What orders from Mordor, my lord?
As you stepped down the stairs, it was like going into a manufacturing zone, but not in the sense of a production. It was like going into the depths of Middle-earth. As you came around the corner and stepped into the studio, the enormity of what we were doing began to strike, mostly from the first effect, which was looking at the stone trolls that would be glowering back at you. But as you moved through the studio, there were the huge towering miniatures on either side, crammed in there. You literally had to weave your way through these huge buildings that were just all teetering and just sitting in position, packed into that studio.
There is something special about using miniatures that Peter loves, and
Now, the department that we oversaw at Weta that required the most extensive amount of work was the realization of the creatures through prosthetics. Although we had small and subtle prosthetics for a lot of the lead actors, the most prolific amount of prosthetic work was used on those that are evil in Middle-earth. The Uruk-hai, the goblins, and of course the orcs.
Peter wanted something special for the goblins of Moria. We drew all kinds of crazy creatures that you could never hope to get anyone inside a suit to play those, but making them into these sort of insect-like creatures with uncomfortable spikes, and I think Jamie probably sculpted out the actual faces they have.
Over the length of 3 films, we produced over 10,000 facial appliances, over 1,800 bodysuits in foam latex.
We brought that in by the container load. Every couple of months we'd have a new container of foam latex arrive. It was purely brought into the workshop to make the thousands of hobbit feet, the suits of Urukai and Orc undergarment bodies.
The foam latex ovens ran 365 days a year for 3.5 years to manufacture the massive amount of appliances out of 3 huge ovens.
It was amazing how much foam latex we used. I could never have visualised that quantity.
All of the prosthetics then had to be washed, seamed, painted and stored on racks ready to go out on set. Prosthetics have a very limited life. Facial appliances only last a day and full suits only last 6 days before they're requiring to be returned to the workshop for either servicing or to be ground up into foam pellets and thrown away.
On top of that too had to come all the paint and the specific sort of prosthetic materials and makeups in order to service the application on set. They also had to be imported from LA.
We had a team of 12 makeup artists operating under Marjorie Hamlin and Dominique Till, who looked after respectively the first and second unit prosthetic requirements for Weta Workshop. Each day, a multitude of characters would be applied into elaborate facial appliances and then put into full foam latex bodysuits. Teeth would go in, contact lenses, and the wigs would finally be fitted to create the overall feeling of these unusual creatures. We'd been working for over a year to develop the feet for the hobbits. Possibly one of the trickiest things that we made on Lord of the Rings, because we had to make a compound that was both tough yet flexible. In one casting, you could blend it onto the foot and it would invisibly blend around the ankle line while still giving enough support to the bottom of the actor's feet. We produced over 1,800 pairs of hobbit feet for the 4 leads alone.
You know, because the Weta guys back at the shop are constantly taking the feedback from these guys and making little design adjustments. But for a long time, when I would walk, the feet would kind of bounce. You know, they kind of bounce a little bit. And now these are actually amazing. I haven't even noticed it. They're really amazing. So what you try and do is to get a little grip action, and but not too much, because it doesn't actually bend at the knuckle. But there's things when you like walk on a toe, you learn how to kind of work the foot a little bit. You know, you can kind of have it sitting there. Unless a kid comes to visit the set and you say, "Oh yeah, these are my feet." Oh, sorry.
They'd settle their feet into these pre-glued foam latex appliances, and then over the next hour to hour and a half, the feet would be very carefully glued to every millimetre of their own feet. If they weren't glued properly, they'd become very quickly detached from their own feet and they'd begin to slide in the prosthetics. Finally, the blending edge was carefully applied around their ankle and the colour was blended up their legs. The little hair pieces that gave the furry impression on the top of the feet had to be hand knotted, one hair at a time, every day. Then they go off to the production makeup trailer where their ears were glued on by the makeup staff. So a day in the life of a hobbit was very much a matter of having to know that you were slipping into those sticky, cold, rubbery feet and then throwing yourself into any environment that New Zealand could offer up for the whole day and just put up with the feeling on the undersole of your feet.
I would go to Weta all the time. I was fascinated with what they were doing.
Liv would often come down to the workshop and sit with us and just talk over things, be involved in the making of stuff, actually sit for her own sculptures and get to know the guys really well.
So we all had to have these face casts done, and I went in to have it done, and I really didn't know what to expect at all, and laid back, and they kind of strapped my hair down and put Vaseline or something on my face, and just suddenly, within seconds, first my eyes, then my mouth, and then just everywhere, this enormously thick, horrible goo came over me. And when they finally took it off, there's like this great suction that happens when they finally take it off, where you can't breathe for a couple of minutes. And I had this weird, like, kind of face. It's just really funny.
I have quite a large nose, and which should have been sufficient for Gandalf's, but once you expand the size of your head with facial hair, then your own features might tend to get a little bit lost in it, and to exaggerate the prominence of a nose sort of keeps everything matching. And it took 2 or 3 days and a variety of tries to get what we all thought was right, simply because you can design a makeup on paper, but once you then apply it to a particular face, it may not turn out quite as you intended.
There is no actor involved in Lord of the Rings that sustained more difficult prosthetics time than John Rhys Davies. At all turns, he tried to make the whole process as enjoyable for himself and Gino, the makeup artist in charge of looking after him.
Today I'm painting a set of Gimli's prosthetics, and he's got this cowl piece that he's going to be wearing. That'll slip on over his head. They'll put that on first, and then the prosthetics will be put on. Then just the forehead here. The forehead will go on, and then we've got the nose and cheek pieces.
Every day he would come in, his face would be cleaned, his hair put back, a final shave of any stubble, and the process began. 4.5 hours later, the foam latex head appliance, the ears, the silicone facial appliances, the huge amount of hand-knotted hair, beard, moustache was applied to turn John Rhys Davies into the character that you see as Gimli.
And I always try to make it my business. Whenever I was in costume and in makeup and I had the armor and all that on, and I was close enough, I would go back and show them the results of their work as it actually looked on, and show them what they'd done.
As you walked into the armour department, there was a different feeling. There was always a frenzied feeling in the armour department, because there was a transformation going on all the time. There was armour being created out of leather, very organic armour, very gritty and grim. Certain parts of the armour department had fantastic array of metals and buckles and rivets and all the sorts of things that would hold it all together. Then you'd move through into the area that was where the steel armour was made, and that in itself was a huge experience because of the fact that the sound itself of the metal being beaten onto an anvil was so loud and so organic that you just couldn't help feeling like you were sort of a part of Middle-earth in there.
John Howe is one of the world's leading people in the understanding of medieval armour and weapons. When John arrived, he was able to bring to Weta a level of design knowledge, fabrication, and some of the complexities of the construction of armour that we didn't understand at that point.
Armor is the most impossible thing to understand and to render illustratively, because all of these static shapes interact with each other in very, very surprising ways, and it's nearly impossible to understand unless you have some fairly serious layman's knowledge about how it works. It's always frightening and astonishing about how beautiful it all is. But I've worn a lot of the real stuff because I'm one of these really thin guys who can get into it all.
He was able to let us know what worked and what didn't, why things were built in a certain way. And that level of inheritance and that level of culture and history that he was able to invest into our armour making process was a wonderful thing for us at that point in the making of Lord of the Rings.
You can design your heart out, for months with a pencil and a paper, but the actual materials themselves, whether it's leather or wood or stone or metal, will lead your hand to shapes and ideas that you cannot arrive at just with a pencil and paper.
We also had the great fortune of finding 2 armour smiths. In the tiny country that is New Zealand, here was 2 guys that were making a living from the fabrication of plate armour. Stu Johnson and Warren Green.
Now, building a forge in the workshop was, Richard was very excited about that idea. He really wanted to approach the whole idea in as traditional a manner as possible. And the only way to do that is to get the stuff hot and to use a hammer and get it on an anvil and do it the way it should be done.
So to that end, every single piece of armour was originally created in plate steel, hand-beaten in the forge here at the workshop. Through designing the Urukai's armour, we wanted to give a feeling of a brutal and almost intuitive armour and weapons. These creatures are only armoured on their fronts. There's no armour on their backs because they would never run from the field of battle. These are the lightweight guerrilla fighting force that are sent out to hunt down the hobbits. They don't carry any heavy armour as they have to travel huge distances at great speed. Their helmets are made in a combination of leather and lightweight steel. The idea of all the spiky bits of leather is so as they're running through the forest. But the feeling we wanted to get with Sauron's helmet was the feeling of a corpse, of the rotting face of a horse corpse, with those long bony structures coming out of those deep-set socketed eyes, those great big nostrils for sucking in and blowing out a lot of air. The intaglio was put on as a photographic process that then was acid etched using sulfuric and hydrochloric acid to eat the surface of the metal to give the appearance that the surface of the steel is crawling with this wicked ivory all over it. Now here is a Gondorian suit of armour from the prologue, a combination of plate steel underneath, covered by this tunic, encrusted with the heraldry of the tree of Gondor, the son of Numenor. Encrusting the armour of the Gondor is these helmets. They carry the seabird's wings of the Gondorian motif. The antiquity of the helmet is such that it's made out of separate components. But an interesting feature is the way that we've actually glued the hair into the helmet. This is so the makeup department don't need to put wigs onto the actors every day. This is from the allegiance of men and elves as they fought with Sauron and the orcs at the plains of Golgoroth. The prologue elves are in the springtime of their years, so we tried to capture a motif, a colour, a palette of spring. The subtle greens, the succulent plant textures of the fabric. This is a race that is coming to the world, a race that is in the strengths of its time. It's got the insignia on the nose bar of the helmet.
The feeling that you used to have when you were standing surrounded by all this armour was that it felt as though it had been discovered on an archaeological dig. It had that sort of realism about it. What was so deceptive is it wasn't. It was made out of plastic, urethane, all those sorts of materials that are so modern today. But in actual fact, the look of it had that detail and realism so well captured that it really did sort of deceive people.
Chainmail is a problem. Chainmail is a cinema nightmare, and there is no convincing way to make any approximation of chainmail without a stroke of genius, and most chainmail in movies is just awful. It's terrifyingly bad. It's either knitted wool that's been sprayed with aluminium paint, or it's made of, whatever, and it always looks crappy. It never looks like the real thing.
Richard came up with this new technique to create chainmail that was fairly light so that you wouldn't weigh down your actors, but much, much, much more real looking.
So they actually devised a way of making it out of plastic. And the thing that they developed entirely in the workshop, under the guidance of Richard and Dominic, one of his chief geniuses, they purchased pressure hose, which is of the right diameter for a link of chainmail, which they would slit down the length. And they devised a machine which would chop it into tiny slices.
This machine is driven by pneumatics, controlled by an electrical servo, and over 3.5 years, It cut 12.5 million rings from a length of black alkathene pipe, over 12 kilometres of pipe. And then two gentlemen at Weta sat for the same length of time and hand assembled those 12.5 million rings into hundreds of garments of incredibly lightweight chain mail.
I have never seen an industry like that. This guy happily sort of linking little bits of chain mail together. I think he said with my armour that he'd linked 80,000 pieces of chain mail together.
I would not have traded this experience for the world. It has been the most amazing time of my life.
No person was more important to the weapons than Peter Lyon. Peter had been making a collection of weapons over the years for the reenactment business in New Zealand.
Pretty spectacular. I love the hero weapons, and you pick up one of those swords, the hero swords, and you realize you're holding a real sword, a real weapon in your hand. Very well balanced. Incredible craftsmanship, and many of these pieces belong in museums.
Since I've started here, I've been working on things that are the swords I've dreamed about working on, and I've also had nightmares about some of them. Some of them have been very fiddly. In particular, what have we got? Narsil is a good example.
Narsil is actually, I'm sure, the only sword that's ever been designed with a hollow pommel, but it's still got enough weight to make it work. So sword fans, please be aware this is the first hollow pommel has ever appeared on the screen.
Now, all of this obviously takes a huge amount of person power. Over 100 weapons were made in this style, where they were actually made in spring steel, exactly as they were 500 years ago. The fullers are individually ground in by eye against a huge linishing table to set the balance on the blade. The hilts are being hand ground out of either plate steel or cast out of bronze. And a sword like this would take about a week.
He was just really quite quiet, and he had this sort of steely look about him. And he picked up his sword, and it just, you know, it's like, and he was like, can I take this? Can I take this with me?
Vigo treated that sword as if it was almost a holy relic that he carried by his side. It was wonderful for the sword makers and the technicians at Weta to see an actor accept the mantle of a character so fully through the use of the props that we had created. The greatest benefit for Weta Workshop, having taken on the 5 departments that we did, was that this singular Tolkien-esque brushstroke could be applied across as much of the workshop as possible. I was able to understand Peter's thoughts and then invest those thoughts through the designers into the individuals within the workshop.
It's just been phenomenal. His workshop is packed with stuff, and he has a huge team of people. They have really led the charge in creating the different cultures of the various races of Middle-earth and the look of the weapons and swords. And without that team of people, these films would never have gotten made. It's as simple as that.